Hey there, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I'll be taking a really quick look at this book. I don't want to get too into it. I think it's worth reading and checking out on its own. And it's a interesting kind of format for a comic that I think is also worth checking out. This is Out of Nothing by Daniel Locke with David Blandy. And this is from Nobrow Press. It's one of their older books, so it's got the nice hardcover. It's got like this textured paper on it. And then, of course, with Nobrow, you always get this amazing production. So this is somebody that's working, an artist working with an author that has a background in science. And what they're doing is, and they have an introduction here from Dr. Adam Rutherford, who's a geneticist, and they're telling basically the story of the universe. So you start out with a very kind of Carl Sagan type of intro here, where you go zoom out from the Earth and you get like the cosmos, and then you link that here. You can just get the sense of some of the really cool art that's in this book, but you link that then to micro and macro structures, so cellular and atomic structures and things like that. But the way this is different is that it's really focused on not just evolution from a scientific standpoint, but it's coming at science as it relates to our urges as artists and our urges to record ourselves, which I think is an interesting spin on it. Here again, you get a sense of just some of the really, really great abstraction that's in the art and some of the really beautiful use of color throughout the book. But here you start to see where this like god woman that is like the main character or narrator that we're following through the extent of the book is now seeing the first storyteller, or not the first storyteller, but an early storyteller. And that's where the link between science and storytelling and art making and stuff comes together in this book, and you really start to get a sense of how this is different from just a Carl Sagan lecture on science and the universe or something like that. So it says he's telling stories to make sense of things. He is their authority. She knows he is wrong. The world wasn't created in the way his stories claimed, but she enjoys them nonetheless for the truth his words have for the audience. And so it's an exploration of that, which is obviously, if you've been watching the channel for a while, something I've been thinking a lot about lately is the relationship between fact and fiction, and when choosing to believe fiction is actually psychologically useful for a creature from a factual standpoint. It's maybe healthy for humans as the type of creatures we are to have mythologies or narratives or religious outlooks, things like that, that even, I could say I know for a fact that this isn't true, but I'm going to go do it. I'm going to have faith. I'm going to go do this little ritual or whatever because of the narrative impact it has on my life. And this book explores that relationship in an interesting way. I'll really jump through the book quick here because I highly recommend it. But here you get a jump now to obviously the Gutenberg Press and talking about any idea, not just those sanctioned by authority. And once mass produced, the idea can spread quickly. So now it's getting into the idea of like memetics, and in the sense of Dawkins, where a rapid transmission of thoughts coincides with the flowering of new thought across Europe, the Renaissance. So how ideas work in a slightly genetic sense, which is what Dawkins was talking about with the meme, is that it's the idea equivalent of a gene. So they're linking that together, not so explicitly as I'm saying, but that seems to be one of the major driving forces of the book, is the way these things kind of mimic each other in the same way that the universe is micro, macro, as above, so below. There's kind of this link between fact and fiction in that way as well, that ideas have their own life cycle and evolution. Here you get a look at a younger Picasso talking about his innovations in painting with cubism, and he's saying, I'm able to dissociate color from form, freeing it, making it independent of form. And then he says, yes, we know art is not truth. Art is the lie that makes us realize the truth. And I think that's a very powerful statement there, that And that was one of the realizations I had to come to, is that you can't always just say the factual truth. That's not enough to make it land for people, that you have to wrap it up in a story, and that makes it emotionally relevant for people. And so I think that little quote there, that art is the lie that makes us realize the truth, is a really great argument for art and for faith and for fiction and myth and things like that. Here I had to just point out, I was pretty excited. They're talking about Leeuwenhoek, the guy that created the microscope. That was one of the early dates that Tori and I took, was to Berkeley, and we were walking through the science building, and she got really excited because they had one of the original, or a recreation, but I think it was the original Leeuwenhoek looking glass, and he was the first guy to have a microscope. And the story behind him is really interesting too, because he wasn't really a scientist. He just kind of had this device that he came up with, and then he ran around looking at diarrhea, semen, like anything he could put under there, and started describing to people that he saw these small animals, and people thought he was nuts at first, but obviously he gave us access to the world of bacteria. So there's a lot of little things like that about the history of science that are in this book. It'd be really, really great book, I think, for kids, because it links together their kind of more art interests, their mythological interests and things, to science. So, someone who's 11 or 12 maybe could start reading this book and getting something out of it and learning a bit of the history of science. Here I really like that throughout the book they're talking a bit about collage as well, how you cut and paste things together. And I think that's really, really smart, that as they're talking about the invention of hip hop and basically sampling, using two records to get the funky part, the get down part of the two records going and keep the people dancing. It was a cut and paste, a collage thing. And I think that, recognizing that in a book about science, recognizing the importance of the beginning of remix culture, which we're still living in, a culture of constant remix, and tying that to memes, that memes that now are kind of these throwaway things we call, viral video or whatever, but it lasts for about a week and then it goes away. But that has a cut and paste collage remix type of aspect to it, and that ideas get cut and pasted and put together like that and have their genetics like that, and that some are stronger and some pass away. There's just all of this kind of thing embedded in and suggested in this book, and obviously tying it to the whole history of culture all the way up through modern times. And then you get a projection forward, maybe you get a little like sci-fi. So you have someone here that's like, it looks like they're on Mars, and they've got a tablet, and they're talking about that we're still driven to document everything we do. We record every aspect of our lives: what we ate for breakfast, how far our lunchtime jog was. The transfer of thought and knowledge isn't reliant on word and mouth. It's now rendered in light, data, raw information, and endlessly reproduced. An individual's experience does survive beyond that individual's death. So really realizing and speaking to the state that we're in now, where we are not wholly bound to our physical bodies, that there are digital informational aspects to us, and probably always have been. We just didn't have access to them. So that this is a new part of reality that's opening up to us, is access to our informational selves, the selves that lie underneath the physical. It's like the substrata of physical reality that manifests physical reality, and linking us to that, and that in that way we can persist. And some of us are uneasy about this idea of existing digitally forever, even in like the Facebook record or whatever. But that gives you a sense of like the scope of what the book covers, in terms of science and in terms of art's relationship to science. So I think it's a really powerful book. I think there's a lot to recommend about it. Obviously, it's got amazing art, and I think it's just a really different type of topic for a graphic novel that's 250 pages long. I think it's really well handled, and I think it's a special kind of book. And then you get it through No Brow's production quality and all of that, with the beautiful hardcover and everything. And I think you have a really outstanding, stellar, singular graphic novel that everyone should check out. So definitely look up Out of Nothing by Daniel Locke and David Blandy. This is an older no-brow book, so I don't know how much longer you'll be able to get a hold of these things before it's out of print forever, or before they re-release it as just a paperback or something like that. So definitely check it out. If you enjoy what we're doing here on the channel and you want to support us, there are two ways to do that. The first is through our Patreon. We have two different tiers of engagement there. At the first tier, you get early access to all of our videos. At the second tier, you can get exclusive previews of the graphic novels that Sean and I are working on, as well as the ability to vote in and participate in what happens in our ongoing webcomic experiment, Pranede. You can help determine what goes on with the story there. We really appreciate that. Any of the money that we get from the Patreon helps us buy the books that we review, so it helps keep the channel going, and it allows us to put some money into other creators' pockets and other publishers' pockets. So we really appreciate that. If you want to support Living the Line itself, the best thing to do is to buy some of the books that Sean's putting out through Living the Line Publishing. So we'll go ahead and take a look at one of those now. Sala Niyalo, Path of the Shades by Clarence Doss is a really cool ongoing project that Living the Line will be producing. Clarence is a PhD student from Fiji who's studying the myths of Fiji for his doctoral thesis. And part of that study project is that he's producing these comics. They're kind of like Hellboy, where there's these little short stories that capture all of these different mythologies. But then he's using that to wrap the project into his doctoral thesis and then provide educational material where people can come to these comics. You know, they don't have to read his PhD thesis. They can come to the comics and get a more consumable version of the mythology of Fiji.
Like and subscribe and hit the bell, please, so Carson can finish reading his books and let me go home.